Hey, what's up, everyone? We are super excited to announce that we will be making our first appearance on the road in Simpsonville, Kentucky, July 28th and 29th at the Called to Freedom Conference. If you are disentangling your faith after experiencing a hyper-fundamentalistic or a legalistic church group, this event is for you. There will be panel discussions, table discussions, inspiring testimonies, all from Christians who have rebuilt their faith, and even a game night, guys. It's a weekend of rebuilding theology, rebuilding community, and rebuilding faith through God's word. So definitely check that out. Also, Jerry and I, we're going to be speaking there, and we're also super excited to meet you in person. You can register for the conference today at bereanholiness.com/conference. That's BEREAN holiness.com/conference. Also, until May 31st, you can use the promo code Cultish in all caps at checkout for $50 off the purchase price. We hope to see you there. Now back to the episode.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cultish, entering the kingdom of the cults. My name is Jeremiah Roberts, one of the co-hosts here. As always, I'm joined by my trusty virtual super sleuth and co-host up in Utah. Andrew, it's good to always have you back join co-hosting with me virtually.
Yeah, thank you, man. I'm excited to be here to talk about eggs, bunnies, and things like that.
Yes, we are going to be delving into the secretive ancient mysteries of the ancient world, talking about what is pagan, what isn't. If you are anywhere around an internet browser and around any time, whether it's we're about to come up on Easter, whether it's Halloween or Christmas, you end up getting usually in your YouTube feed, TikTok, Instagram, all sorts of influencers asking whether or not Mother's Day is pagan, is Valentine's Day pagan, is Easter pagan. And what we want to do is we want to maybe have a holistic episode. We're going to focus in this episode specifically on Easter, also on some aspects of how we should think about history. With that being said, I want to introduce our guest, which I'm very excited to talk to. We have Michael Jones from the YouTube channel Inspiring Philosophy. First of all, man, it's really cool that I didn't know you were in Arizona. So thanks for coming out here, being in studio. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Awesome. Just tell everyone just a little bit about, in case they don't know about you, you have a YouTube channel. Tell them about it.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is Inspiring Philosophy. I create various documentaries, animations, defending Christianity, going into a lot of Old Testament scholarship, New Testament scholarship, arguments for God's existence. Currently doing some stuff on eschatology. I'm planning a series on the reliability of the Gospels over the summer. So I do a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for quite a while. We talked a little bit before the podcast. When did you start doing this?
2011, so for over 10 years.
Okay. And it was interesting because when I started doing some of our preliminary research last year on talking about the origins of Halloween, your videos came up a lot. And it seemed like you were an oasis in a desert of a lot of really crazy claims out there. What was the first time, what inspired you initially, pun intended, since you're Inspiring Philosophy, what inspired you to kind of make those content videos about like Halloween, Christmas? I mean, it was a while ago when you made those. Mm-hmm. What was the catalyst for that?
Well, the catalyst was I was dealing with legalists, people in the Torah observant movement, Jehovah's Witnesses as well, very fundamentalist leaning type people, very legalist. And they were claiming things like, you can't celebrate Christmas because Christmas is originally a pagan holiday.
Right.
And if you do that, you're actually going to worship the devil accidentally. You're going to be partaking in pagan practices, which God hates. Mm-hmm. And I heard that and I was like, this is some of the stupidest crap I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. Because someone told me, when you put a present under the pine tree, you're bowing down to that tree. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is not how Christianity works. Mm-hmm. You're not going to accidentally worship a pagan deity just by decorating an egg or putting a present under a tree. This is absurd. Mm-hmm. So I was like, at the time, I was like, okay, sure. Everyone knows these come from pagan roots, but let me explain to you how sin works and why it's not a big deal. But then I started looking into it more and I realized, wow, none of these holidays actually have pagan roots. These are all modern myths. None of them go back to paganism. And, it started to slowly fall. Like I realized the date of December 25th was not pagan. Then I realized Easter wasn't pagan. Then I realized Christmas traditions weren't pagan. Even Yule logs didn't go back to paganism or mistletoe. Then I realized the same with Halloween and then Valentine. And eventually, the more I looked into the primary sources, I realized there's no evidence any of this goes back to paganism. So what is everyone even scared of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely seen that really evolving. You mentioned the Torah observance, specifically Hebrew roots. A lot of them, they have the presupposition that, or at least the claim that the only thing we are to really truly celebrate or participate in are the feast. There's specific, anything else outside that specific example is pagan. You can't worship God. In fact, like I said, you're opening yourselves up to the devil. Then you see that kind of like reimagined, resyncretized, depending if you're more like charismatic leaning, where the devil sometimes in certain sects of hypercharismania, where the devil's kind of in everything. Andrew, give me some of your initial thoughts, because you did some research. You checked out Michael Jones' YouTube channel. Really great content there. What are some of the thoughts you have on this whole conversation, and what's a question maybe you kind of have for Michael as we kind of jump into this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to echo what Michael was saying, that the more you look into it, and he used the term primary sources, you find that a lot of these claims are myths with no primary sources, and the primary sources that we do have don't tell the same story. So, Michael, I'm wondering if you can tell us what's important about a primary source, and go from there a little bit.
So a primary source would be something that'd be closer to the culture or the events that took place. So we would say, for example, that Plutarch, ancient writer Plutarch, would be a primary source on beliefs, culture of that time period that he was writing in, which was at the beginning of the 2nd century. We would say St. Bede can also be a primary source because he's writing about early beliefs in his reckoning of time, of what some of the Germanic tribes believed, what some of their months were called. So he's attesting to where this stuff came from. A secondary source would be like a scholar today writing, someone like Ronald Hutton or Thomas Schmidt, writing about the things that the primary sources talk about.
And so,
perfect.
Go ahead. Did you have any?
No, I said that's perfect, man. I like that, because we do need to understand, well, where is this information coming from, and what are the quotes that are being used from actual primary sources in terms of these festivals that were being celebrated anciently. So yeah, go for it, Jerry.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus specifically in on Easter. So maybe we could talk about, usually as Christians, we adhere to, ever since I was a kid. I mean, I grew up kind of in a Christian household, and where it was really, you celebrate Christ is risen, the resurrection. You know, I lost count of how many times, even as a kid, you remember he is risen. He is risen. He's doing like the sunrise services, like at 6 o'clock in the morning in some cases. But maybe we can use that as a catalyst to talk about, this is how the resurrection is an example of how, as Christians, we should view history and view primary sources. Because you look at the secular argumentation against the resurrection, it's usually they start to go into a lot of pseudo-history when you start arguing against the resurrection. But it seems that Christians, while they would adhere to a lot of accurate way you should view history when it comes to the resurrection, that starts to dissipate and fall away when you make this argumentation. So it's like they're trying to argue, at least in my opinion, for the resurrection using the way you should use history and primary sources, but it deviates when you try and make these other claims. Can you differentiate between the two? Like, one, how should we view history? How do we interpret it through the nature of the resurrection? And then where does it start to fall apart when it comes to these ideas of, like, for example, Easter being pagan, which we're going to jump into?
Well, let's start with the Easter thing, and then we'll talk about the resurrection.
Sure.
Well, actually, no, let's talk about the resurrection first. So when we make a case for the resurrection, we use sources that are closest to this. We're going to use Paul's writings, earliest Christian writings. We're going to use the Gospels as well, earliest accounts on the life of Jesus. We can even use some sources like Josephus as well, who talk about how Jesus, his followers reported that he had come back to life. So you can use that kind of stuff. When people try to make this case that Easter is pagan, they're not doing that. They're not going to early sources. They're saying, well, I found on the blog or the History Channel reported that everything goes back to this pagan spring goddess. And my reply is always like, okay, well, where does it say this? And they say, well, it's in this article I found on the History Channel's website. Yeah, but the History Channel's website doesn't list any sources. Where are they getting their information from? Did St. Bede mention this? Is it mentioned in some of the earlier works, like the Snorri Sturluson mentioned some sort of Norse practice related to this? How about Theitmar the Chronicler? Does he mention any of this stuff?
Right.
Where are you getting this stuff from? And so this is the difference, is when people argue, like Christians, like we argue for the resurrection,
right,
we're going to the earliest sources and we're going to make our case from that. A lot of these people arguing that Easter is pagan, they're not doing that. They're just finding some blog or some meme or some TikTok video they found, and they're using that as their basis of what they're deciding is true.
Hey everyone, sorry to interrupt your programming, but this episode of the podcast is brought to you by stagsconsulting.com. Are you a small business owner or entrepreneur? If you are, you know the different hassles and headaches that come with trying to keep up to date with your accounting, bookkeeping, all that sort of stuff. Kyle and Sherry, they specialize in helping to deal with that, to take away the stress, the headaches, the uncertainty, to make sure you are fully compliant, and they have a lot of other services available. If you want to check them out, go to stagsconsulting.com/cultish. They would give you a free consultation for listeners only, and go ahead and check them out. Again, stagsconsulting.com/cultish. Definitely check them out. Back to the episode. And so a lot of people, when they are making these claims, and it's only recently you started you had your own Instagram and TikTok where you're doing a lot more response incoming. People should definitely check out your channel. I love just the way you kind of go about it. And a lot of your humor comes across, and I think we'd share a lot of the sentiments. I probably would do stuff similar if I do, like when I start doing some of those. But when usually people are making these claims, when the statement says, do your own research, what immediately comes to mind when you hear them say that?
They've not done their research, and they want you to do it for them. Because a lot of these people, I'll get told that. I got told by a Muslim. My most popular TikTok video, I responded to a Muslim. He just said in the video, Google it. It'll come up and it'll prove I'm right, kind of mentality. And I was like, okay, anytime someone tells you to Google it, you know they haven't done research. Because there's a lot of bad information on Google. You could Google Easter is pagan. You're going to get 100,000 blogs saying it's pagan. None of them are properly sourced. Mm-hmm. So when people say do your own research, I would say, yeah, I have, because you haven't. And it's pretty clear. So if you've actually did your own research, give me your sources. And they never can.
Right. And so when it comes to where does this come from, the idea that Easter is pagan? Because while a lot of these examples, people, and this isn't just Easter, people claim to be having the special insight about the ancient world. For example, one of the things we'll delve into later is Jesus a copy of the pagan gods? Is Jesus just a copy of Osiris? While they claim that this is from the ancient world, a lot of these ideas are relatively new, like around 100 years old. Talk about that if you could.
Well, I mean, in the 1800s, there was a lot of folklorists, a lot of historians trying to figure out more of the past. I mean, archaeology was just getting up and going. People were really interested in the past. I mean, we don't realize this, but we didn't really decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics until the 1800s. And so at the same time, there was a lot of pseudo-history coming out while actual Egyptologists and archaeologists were doing their research. And so a lot of, snake oil salesmen were able to capitalize on that and push out a lot of false information. And so that happened. And so in the same time, people were trying to look at Easter and they're going, well, rabbits, eggs, these aren't in the Bible. Where does this stuff come from? And why do we call it Easter? Easter is not in the Bible either. Where does this stuff come from? So in some regards, they started looking at some folklore, and they came up and they would find what common stories were being told by, the poor class in that time of Britain, for example, or in Ireland. And so some of these folklore traditions were written down. The problem is there was no evidence that any of these traditions went back to any ancient paganism, let alone past the 1800s. Right. I mean, a lot of these traditions, look at something like Elf on the Shelf. That's a pretty new custom that came about pretty recently. I didn't do that as a kid. Very new. So people come up with all sorts of new traditions on their own throughout the ages.
Well, I had no idea that was even a thing until they were like the memes, like, you've heard of Elf on a Shelf, but have you heard of it? But then it's like, the idea, it's something rhymes with something. Yeah. Like, the meme temple I'm talking about, like, oh, that was a thing? I didn't know that.
Yeah, same for me. But same with a lot of these folklore traditions about the origins of Easter. It seems that a lot of it came about just from people speculating in the 1800s. None of it actually goes back to any historians or any actual primary sources. And there's a scholar named Ronald Hutton. Now, Ronald Hutton is not a Christian. He would classify himself more as like an agnostic, druid, pagan type person, and he was tasked with looking into this stuff to try to find any remnants of paganism in modern Christian society that they could latch onto and use. And his conclusion was there's very little of, if any. And so he basically had, in his book, Stations of the Sun, had to write that a lot of this stuff just comes from European folk traditions and Christian customs.
Let me ask you this, Andrew. I'll let you jump in here in a second. With all of this, like, why does this matter? I mean, usually you kind of like, I can just let this slide. You know, people are just going to be there, but it hasn't mattered to you. Like, you've done whole videos of it. You started doing on Instagram, really, doing all this response incoming. If anyone's watched your YouTube channel, you know, I know it's a video of yours. And you just scrolling through your Instagram feed, and all it says response incoming. I stop what I do. I want to hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
Right, but honestly, man, like, why does this matter? I mean, can we just agree to disagree, or why is this so important to you?
This is important, and this should be important to Christians for a simple reason. Remember what Jesus did when he dealt with the Pharisees. He was so mad at them for putting their own traditions on top of the scriptures, and they eventually superseded the scriptures in their eyes. They were more important. And that, he said, was destroying their faith in God. It was ruining them. It was corrupting them from the inside out. What are a lot of these modern legalists doing? These anti-holiday people like Jim Staley, for example. They have superseded the word of God, and they're saying, if you really want to be holy, if you really want to follow Jesus, you can't be keeping these things where you paint eggs, because God hates it when you paint eggs around Easter, or when you hang a stocking. God is so mad about that. That's not how the gospel works. Read 1 Corinthians 8. Just because a pagan may have used something for evil in the past, like meat, that doesn't mean it's going to be unholy or wrong for us. Jesus gave us a spirit of victory, a spirit of triumph, not a spirit of fear, to be afraid of all these random hidden pagan meaning things around the world. He gave us a spirit of victory. And you can't accidentally worship the devil just because a pagan may have in the past worship a tree. That doesn't mean you're worshiping a tree if you put one in your house in December. Pagans may have used eggs in fertility rituals in the past. So what? Eggs were created by God for us to eat and enjoy. Yep. We can do what we want with them. And even though there's no evidence Easter eggs go back to paganism, even if they did, there's nothing in the intention of a Christian using an Easter egg that would mean they're somehow accidentally honoring a pagan deity, because you can't accidentally honor a pagan deity. So the reason why this is important is because I see legalists trying to sneak into the church, much like what Paul was talking about in the Galatians, these people coming in and trying to say, let's just add to the word of God a little bit and change things. And it's going to slowly destroy the church from within. It'll slowly lead to more legalism. We'll forget the gospel. People will be afraid of the devil under every rock. And that's not what Christ gave us. And we need to remember that.
Andrew, what's in your mind? What questions do you have for Michael, given what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, so how should we respond to the people that are constantly perpetrating these myths, right? From Christians and also the secular world at large. It seems like they have a... they have a grip on the information that is being spread through Instagram, TikTok, things of that nature, where these lies are just constantly being told. What should we do with regards to that?
Take a page out of the atheist playbook that I see a lot. Put the burden of proof on them. Okay, you've made the claim that Easter is pagan. What's your evidence? Oh, and don't give me some blog you found. I want your primary sources. I want you to go back to the ancient world. Show me where it is in St. Bede that shows that Easter is pagan. Show me where it is in, for example, early Christian sources, like, on solstices and equinoxes, to give one from the first millennium. Show me where it is. You put the burden on them. Don't let them think that it's your job to debunk all this stuff. I do the same with people claiming that Jesus is a copy of Horus,
right,
or Jesus is a copy of Mithra or something. Okay, you've made these claims, now back them up.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense, man. I think, at least for me, that I kind of got passionate about this topic, and I started re-exploring your channel, even though I'd gone a couple of years ago. I came across, like I said, you've been around for a while, but it was really last year when I saw a lot of people sharing that Anton LaVey quote, that fake Anton LaVey quote, which basically states that he says in this thing, this is the one night of the year where children get to worship the devil. That's not even consistent with Anton LaVey's worldview and how he viewed Satan. But that quote doesn't exist. There's no primary source for it, and it's all Christian fundamentalists quoting each other on each other's blogs. I even offered a $100 Cash App reward for anyone who could give me the source.
Oh, I'll go even higher. I'll do 1,000. I mean, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, right, exactly. But when I pointed that out from it, I wasn't really trying to say whether you should or shouldn't celebrate it. I mean, maybe somebody could have convictions even, maybe not to celebrate what I wouldn't have it. But I'm like, you shouldn't use fake history or a fake source and then stand behind it. I was really troubled by the amount of people who still stood behind it and got upset when I said this quote is fake, or also when you started pushing on, well, actually history doesn't matter. Well, history just mattered to you a second ago when you quoted this fake source. Now all of a sudden you find out the source is fake, history doesn't matter. And I think as Christians, one, that's not how we should think about history, but also we have a responsibility to tell the truth, not bear false witness, and make sure if it's any group, even if it's the Church of Satan, like we need to accurately represent them.
Well, this is what I mean. For a lot of these legalists, it's not that history matters, it's that their narrative matters. Because they have an agenda. They want to get you afraid of the devil, even though we shouldn't be afraid of him because Jesus already defeated him. They want to get you afraid of the devil. They want to get you afraid of these holidays because then they can control us and they can make us do certain things like follow their legalist agenda, look to them for guidance, and join their churches, and it's they use fear to try to get people to join them.
Right.
And quite frankly, the old saying, misery loves company. And a lot of them, unfortunately, that's where they're at.
Right. Well, yeah, and I think there's also in a matter of almost, I hate to say it, some people, it's not the case with every single person, but a lot of times there is sort of this have and have nots. Like, I'm better than you. And I hate to say it, it's almost kind of like that meme of, you've seen the aristocrats looking down. A lot of times this is how they'll view people who who do celebrate these holidays. Well, I don't, so I'm better than you.
Exactly. It's very much a holier than thou mentality.
Right.
If you really want to please God, yeah, it's great that you believe Jesus rose from the dead, but if you really want to please him, you should be avoiding these evil pagan holidays because God is so angry when you put presents under a tree or you dress up as an Avenger and get candy. It's like, really? Is your God so insecure he's worried about that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Who do they worship, really?
Right. And just curious, maybe we can zoom out just for fun a little bit. You've done this for a while, and you definitely are a bit of a history nerd. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite era of history? Is it American history, world history? Do you have a topical point, either or just biblical history? What are some areas that you've enjoyed just kind of studying and researching?
It's hard to say. I'm a World War II buff. I like studying World War II history, especially the Pacific War, because that's kind of undervalued. I like a lot of different areas of history. I like ancient Near Eastern history. I like first century, studying a lot of the stuff around Christianity and that kind of stuff. I like medieval history a lot, tracking how Christianity sort of moved throughout the Middle Ages. I just am a history buff. I don't know if I have one area I like to study. I like to move around a lot to different subjects.
But throughout this, one, I think you have, how do we determine history? It's through primary sources. In fact, I just bought this giant, thick biography. I was like, I just have this itch to start studying Civil War stuff. And, you go to, I just bought this giant biography of Ulysses S. Grant. And so I just started going through his book, and it's so fascinating to a small little niche of history. There's so many intricacies, but what they do though is they go to primary sources. They go to the letters that Ulysses S. Grant would write to generals during the Civil War, so you could actually see that. In the same way where you go to I've been to Gettysburg, and you go there and you're it's so weird being there. It's you have all these giant monuments to the different regiments, and it's hey, this is what happened. So when I went to Gettysburg on this high school trip forever ago, we actually watched the movie Gettysburg, which was filmed on site prior to going on location. And you talk about historical accuracy of wow, you could really tangibly feel it. So I think just in general, it's I think when you look at history, one, you want a primary source that you want to be accurate, but also I think as Christians, and you give me your thoughts, there is a linear timeline. This is God working through history, and a lot of times in pagan nations. And usually the emphasis is this is how God sovereignly is working with his people, not, oh, this is pagan, this is the pagan. Look at Daniel. It's no, this is God working in that. You know what I mean? What do you think about that?
Well, you just read the Old Testament. Do you realize how many things God used that were originally pagan? Look at the temple at Bethel in the book of Joshua. Okay, yeah. That was not built by Joshua. The book of Joshua doesn't mention it. It just is sort of there. I'm sorry, the temple at Shechem, Bethel, up to El, to God El. We know that it was there while it was built, based on the archaeology, that it was built before Israel moved in at the end of the Bronze Age. It goes back to, I believe, the 1600s BC. So they just took it over and reclaimed it and used it as a temple for God. The Ark of the Covenant was based on Egyptian ritual furniture of the time period. The book of Proverbs takes sometimes word for word Proverbs we get from an earlier Egyptian work called the Instruction of Amenemop. Acts 17, Paul quotes a pagan philosopher, Eratist. It was a Stoic pantheist, and says, he's actually talking about the God of Israel now. Right. Why? Because we've reclaimed it. We've now made it ours. Now, when Eratist wrote that, he was talking about his Stoic pantheist god Zeus that he believed in. He wasn't thinking of the God of Israel, but Paul takes the words and says, now that's about the God of Israel. And then we see early Christians doing this. They turned the Pantheon in Rome into a church.
Right.
They rededicated the obelisk that Caligula moved there, and they put a cross on top, so now it's a finger pointing up to the heavens. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing any of that. We see it in the Bible, and then we see it in early Christian history. What is everyone scared of?
Hey, what's up, everyone? We love that you are enjoying our content on a weekly basis, but this program cannot continue and wouldn't be possible without your support. So if you want to go to thecultishtshow.com, there is a donate tab. You can either support us one time, or you can become a monthly partner with us. That will allow us to continue this program, allow us to continue to be salt and light to the kingdom of the cults. So please go to thecultishtshow.com/donate, and you can support us one time or monthly. Also, make sure you check out our merchandise store. Go to shopcultish.com. You can see all of our great designs. A lot of you have gotten merchandise from us already. So again, you either go to shopcultish.com and check out all the awesome merch. Back to the show. No, man, I love even the very early Christian history. I love it. Have you ever heard of a docuseries? It came out eons ago called The Trial and Testimony of the Early Church.
I have not seen it.
You not seen it? Okay. It's really good because what I found fascinating, it just describes the first century church and just going through the different emperors in Rome. And what I find just so fascinating, just talking about history in general and just Christian history, the early Christian history, is that you have people from every single tribal background you could think about. You have people who are Roman, you have people who are Nordic, who are more Viking oriented. You had people who just from every single sect and branch who have been just killing each other for centuries. And all of a sudden they all gathered together in these houses just to worship this person named Jesus who died, who was crucified, rose again. And everyone just was unified from all these unique backgrounds and cultures. And what I think is just interesting is that it's just fascinating to see the early first century. But let me ask you this: when it comes to Easter, what's the earliest record that we have? Because I want to get into the pseudo history in a second, but I want to talk about the original because that's what everyone likes to claim. But where did this all start? What's the first record that we have of where the celebration of Jesus, of Christians celebrating the resurrection, the way that Easter is, and where do they? How did it all start?
Well, obviously
we have resurrection, stuff like that, but yeah.
Well, we have evidence of Easter celebrations going back in the form of Easter sermons into the 2nd century, for example. So, we know that Christians in the 2nd century were celebrating the Easter celebration, Resurrection Sunday. At the time, they were sort of following the Passover. So there's never been one place where Easter, the way we celebrate Easter today, came about. It's a slow change over time. So early Christians were celebrating Easter, obviously, because they wanted to celebrate the resurrection. So then in the 300s, you have Constantine and the Council of Nicaea come along. Now, there's a lot of myths about the Council of Nicaea.
Yeah,
but one thing they did discuss is the date of Easter. And they decided to stop following the Jewish calendar, and they just sort of designated it should fall after the spring equinox. But they didn't really designate when. Then you get about later on in the 700s, I believe, St. Bede comes along and he publishes a work called The Reckoning of Time. And that's when you finally get the formal calculating of Easter, that it's going to be on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. And so then we've been sort of following that since then, especially in the West. And his book was very popular. It spread out through the West. He was able to he showed people how to calculate the date of Easter.
Was it always called Easter, or what's the true etymology of that? When did Christians start calling it that? Because you look at, first century, when Paul's talking about, he's just saying 1 Corinthians 15, talking about how Christ died for our sins, was buried on the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and then rose again. You don't really see Easter mentioned in the Bible. What do you know about the origins of that true etymology?
Yeah, so no one in the ancient world called it Easter because English wasn't invented yet. And you have a lot of conspiracy theorists and people who've not done their homework assume Easter comes from some sort of goddess like Ishtar or Ostra. Well, it sounds like it. It must be from that. Well, you have to wrestle with the fact that the majority of the Christian world outside of English Germanic languages call the holiday the Pascha, or a derivation of that. Why? Because Christ died during Passover week. So the Christians call it the Pascha celebration. So romantic languages, so like, Latin-based languages, pretty much in Russian, pretty much any language other than like German or English, they're calling it Pascha or a derivation of that. So problem right there that you're going to claim that Easter goes back to some sort of pagan goddess when most people call it the Pascha, which we know comes from the Passover. So why do we call it Easter? Well, the reason is because St. Bede sort of talks about it in the Reckoning of Time. I actually have the quote. I can pull it up directly from St. Bede here. So in the Reckoning of Time, section 15, he says this. He says, Ostramanath has a name which is now translated as Paschal month, and which was once called after a goddess of theirs named Ostra, in whose honors feasts were celebrated in that month. Now they designate the Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of her new rite by the time-honored name of the old observance. So Bede tells us that the Paschal celebration in his region of Britain was celebrated during what they would call the months of Ostara-Manath. And so they just started calling it the Ostara-Manath celebration, sort of like how we call it the 4th of July,
right?
Even though it's Independence Day as well. It doesn't mean it's a holiday honoring Julius Caesar. Likewise, Easter just sort of took the English name of the month it fell on. And that's why we call it Easter today, and the rest of the world calls it Pascha.
Yeah.
So you could say, the name comes from a month named after a goddess, but that is an indirect connection, and it has nothing to do with the actual Pascha celebration. There's no evidence that the Pascha, or Easter, was a taking over of some sort of pagan holiday.
Right. Andrew, what's in your mind? What questions do you have for Michael as we delve into this conversation? Dude, we're very insightful, man. I'm loving this so far.
Yeah. I love it. Also, let me just ask you a question there too. So this, I can never know how to pronounce it. The EOSTRE. How do you pronounce that again?
I've heard it different ways. Ostra is what I've heard as well.
So Ostra. So there's also no evidence through this primary source that we have in Bede that talks about exactly how this was celebrated, right?
Yeah.
Like there's not bunnies, there's not eggs or anything like that.
No, none of that. This is the only reference we have to her in history. Is in this. Now, some historians have even doubted she existed, but lately, like Philip Shaw, for example, made some interesting arguments that she probably was a real goddess worshipped in that region. And so that's what's the name of the month. I mean, Bede mentions other months, like November was called Blood Month. September was called a holy month because of holy rites in that time. So if you really wanted to overtake a pagan holiday, they should have put something in September because that was holy month according to the ancient pre-Christian pagans.
Right.
So there's nothing about Ostara that connects her to bunny rabbits or eggs. All of that came out centuries later from Easter practices, European customs. So eggs, for example. So isn't it interesting that Easter happens right after Lent? And in the Middle Ages, no one could eat animal products during the Lent fast. So no meat, no dairy, no eggs. Eggs can keep well, though, if you hard boil them. So when, Lent was ending, they'd gather up the eggs and they'd hard boil them. And then they started painting them. The first reference we have to them painting eggs is about 1290 when King Edward I of England, so he said he wanted 450 eggs painted gold for the royal house. So yeah, that's where eggs came about. They came from Lent. Totally Christian in origin, has nothing to do with paganism. We have no evidence that eggs go back to being a symbol of Ostara or anything like that.
Yeah. Let me ask you this too, because we're going to kind of go into the specifics of claims. We've got a couple of TikTok videos we're going to jump into in a second. Is that you think about like Gnosticism. This is something that the Christians have fought from the first century. So usually if there's something that Christians have been adamantly against, you should be able to find sources of them speaking out against it. So you look at, the works of Athanasius. You have ideas of like modalism, people speaking out against the Trinity, and the whole record of like Athanasius Contra Mundum. Like Christians fighting against distortions of the Trinity, like that's on record. That's a matter of church history. You look at Gnosticism, denying that Jesus is God come in the flesh. That's another issue. Like there's a extenuated public record of. So if these holidays are definitively pagan, we'll delve into also Christmas, Halloween. There should be, in my opinion, an extensive record of Christians throughout the century fighting back. If indeed, if all these things are owned by the pagans, there should be extensive record of them pushing back again. Do we find that evidence of Christians pushing back against like Easter, Christmas, Halloween? And if not, If so, but if not, like, why is that?
Not until much later after these holidays have been established. So like recent years. Take Christmas, for example. When Christmas was set on December 25th, based on the calculations of early Christians, that had nothing to do with paganism. We can talk about that later. But in the East, after the big Orthodox Catholic split, a lot of Eastern writers would have started accusing the Catholic Church of placing it on December 25th. Because of a pagan holiday. So it became part of their like propaganda to attack the Catholic Church kind of thing. Like they said, oh, you just picked that because of paganism.
Right.
But there's no history to support that. So you see these things come about centuries after it happened as sort of like some sort of anti-Catholic agenda, either from like Protestants or Orthodox Christians. That's where a lot of the anti-Easter stuff comes from. It came from a Scottish minister named Alexander Hislop, writing in the 19th century. He wrote a book called The Two Babylons, and said that, really Easter and all these holidays are Catholic, and it's really a secret cult worshiping the god Nimrod and his wife Semiramis. The problem is that's absolute crap. He made all this up. There is no evidence that Babylonians worshipped anyone called Nimrod. He's only mentioned in the Bible, not in Mesopotamian texts. So he just made up a bunch of stuff. But he was quite popular, and his works caught on, and people still cite his nonsense as if it's it's accurate.
Yeah, and I feel like too, and Andrew, you think about what comes to mind, Andrew, and you can give me your thoughts. Is it reminds me so much in this whole story is the of Joseph Smith and the Book of Abraham. Like he found all this Egyptian funerary text, and I think there's a short amount of time in like Joseph Smith's time, because there's a lot of birds of a feather flock together, where they could kind of get away with this because the Rosetta Stone hadn't been created yet. They could truly decipher the primary sources. And so it wasn't until later, after Joseph Smith's death, when they actually recovered this text and they were able to find that it was not the Book of Abraham. It was something completely different. So you have this era where it's people like, what was the guy you mentioned?
Alexander Hislop.
Yeah, just with the stuff that you showed me, you've talked about, it reminded me just so much of the Book of Abraham stories. So it just reminds me so much. Andrew, what comes to mind, because you've studied a lot about the Book of Abraham. What similarities do you see there?
Yeah. I mean, the 19th century is just a hotbed for all of that activity, right? We've got Charles Taze Russell, and don't celebrate any holidays, don't even celebrate your birthday. It just seems like the impetus for people like Mike was talking about earlier, especially quote unquote religious people, is they can use these things to type of ignorance to control people. But I'm wondering, Mike, what do you think is the impetus for atheists or even pagans to cite this type of information, especially when they think that they're being factually sound when they cite this information? What is the motive behind it when they're citing pseudo-history?
Well, I mean, you can't psychoanalyze anyone, but from what I've seen, pagans tend to want to try to find something in modern Christian traditions that might go back to paganism. So you'll see pagans saying that we put up a Yule tree because that's what it originally was before you Christians stole it. Right. And it's utter nonsense. We have no evidence of Yule trees that were anything like Christmas trees. But I think for a lot of pagans, they're trying to just find something they can latch onto to hold to their pagan traditions. For atheists, I mean, it's just, a lot of them, to be fair, I have a lot of atheists I know online that debunk this stuff. People like, for example, Joseph A.P. Wilson or Tim O'Neill have debunked a lot of these holiday myths, and I appreciate that. But then I think a lot of the other atheists, their motive is it's sort of like just sort of to attack Christianity. Haha, look how stupid you guys are. You think you're actually worshiping Jesus and you're actually worshiping, these pagan gods. And, it's also sort of to push a colonial narrative that Christianity just breeds colonialism where we steal everything and make it our own. And it's just utter nonsense when you start to look into it.
Yeah. So social media, and I think we would probably agree in many ways it's a gift. Like you have now a whole ministry that off of your YouTube channel and your Instagram channel, really kind of be able to get your message out there. A lot of the content, really appreciate and enjoy. And the same here. Like we're having a conversation here. It's going to be viewed by who knows how many thousands of people, and it's just one-time conversation can be listened to lots of times. So that's a real blessing. But also, the curse side of it, it's that you look at what you're dealing with and what you do a lot of time on your Instagram channel, the response incoming, right? You're seeing now what you were dealing a while back, in the earlier YouTube years. Think about how much social media has evolved. Now you're seeing all these all this being regurgitated on TikTok, and everyone's starting, stating this stuff. What do you think about that's problematic now? What are some of the challenges now, like now with everything now being repurposed in the TikTok world of sorts with the stuff that you deal with?
Yeah, I mean, it's all over TikTok. I mean, because anybody can just start a TikTok channel and start spouting nonsense now. And unfortunately, a lot of the younger people are just more gullible, just from, we know from psychology. The younger you are, the more likely you're going to fall for something. And so there's a lot of young people on TikTok spouting this nonsense. Not a lot of people there challenging it. So, I mean, I got on to try to help with that and to try to correct some of this stuff, because they're just recycling a lot of these old dead arguments that have been debunked time and time again on YouTube or on other platforms, or that would be laughed at in academia.
Yeah.
But because they're on TikTok, it's like a safe space for, conspiracy theories.
Gotcha. Well, safe space no more. We are going to jump into that space and just dig into this real time. So our good friend Brandy, she went through and did a bunch of sifting through us. I didn't really want to have a bunch of Chinese spyware on my phone, so I figured, I would rather not have to deal with that. But we have a couple of videos that we're just picked up here. So let's just go ahead and pick a random one. The first one I'm going to pick up is one called Atheist Johnny Depp. So I believe it's a young lady, and she wants to do her impression of a Johnny Depp atheist talking to Christians, and she is utilizing argumentation about Easter being pagan. So here we go. Give a second for this to load.
So you want me to be a Christian then?
Yeah.
But in order to do that, I need to give up all my favourite holidays.
Yes.
No, I can do, mate. No. Celebration of Easter's next, that's a favourite.
Easter?
You know, goddess of the dawn, the celebration of light, life, fertility, all of that. The parties are pretty epic if you catch my drift.
Drift?
Wow, you're really boring. Have you not heard of the legend of the goddess of Easter turning a bird into a rabbit and they lay multicoloured eggs?
No.
Yeah, the kids really get a kick out of that one.
When's Easter?
Oh, the first Sunday after the full moon of the vernal equinox.
What a coincidence. That is the very same day that Jesus rose from the grave. You're joking.
No, Jesus totally died and resurrected in the spring, but on the day of Easter. More or less. What are the odds? Oh. So does that mean if I become Christian, I can still have all my favourite holidays? Yeah. Sweet. Nailed it.
All right, so what do we got there? Do we have an irrefutable argument? We just need to pack up and go home. We had a good run, or do we have the response to this? What do we do with atheist Johnny Depp?
Well, for example, that story about Ostra turning an egg, what was it, like an egg into like a rabbit or something, or something like that. Those stories come again from folklorists of the late 19th century. None of that goes back to any historical sources. We have no evidence that they had picked. Had some sort of celebration for Ostra on this day as a being like the first Sunday after the first full moon of the spring equinox. No, that comes from Christian calculations, like St. Bede, for example, and others that did this stuff. This is Christian calculations, what they thought the Pascha celebration should be. It had nothing to do with this kind of stuff. We don't even know how Ostra was worshipped. There's nothing that associates her with eggs or rabbits or any of that kind of stuff. Again, all made up in the 1900s.
All right.
So, I mean, the irony of it all is this is actually pagans taking a Christian holiday, that of Easter, and they're repackaging it to be a pagan one. They claim we are the people who came in and stole the holiday and returned it to Christian. They're coming and taking these Christian holidays and trying to turn them into pagan celebrations. It's ironic.
It's like, well, they're projecting in a sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're projecting, what they're doing to us.
Right. Andrew, what are you going to say?
Yeah, it's funny because, like Mike was saying, that this person has no primary sources for the bird turning into a bunny and a star, things of that nature. But Christians actually do have primary sources on the resurrection when it occurred through the Gospels, right? These are eyewitness accounts. So, like you said, it's very ironic that the claims are being made when Christians actually have firm history that we stand on for why we believe Jesus died when he died on Passover weekend. So it's just, I don't know. It's something that takes a little bit more than a minute or 2 minutes to think about. Right. And this generation only wants a minute to think about something, and they just kind of accept it and regurgitate it. It's kind of what we're taught in our modern day school system regardless. So I don't know. It's one of those things.
Yeah. And also once you become familiar with the argumentation, you start to see even how people sort of blend stuff together. I don't know if at least I caught, you can tell me your thoughts. It sounded like I was kind of hearing a little bit of that kind of zeitgeist. Like she's taking the Easter's pagan argumentation, but also combining it where, actually they just copied this they copied the resurrection from Easter. It sounds like she's doing that. So, and we'll jump into some of the guy stuff in just a little bit. All right, so here's another one. This is Ostra history. Let's go ahead and jump into this one, see what we find here.
Let's talk history. Happy Easter, everybody, or should I say, Ostara. What are the origins of this pagan holiday? Ostara is the goddess of spring. Colors are very important. Now, Ostara, when she was sent to Earth, this goddess was a bit confused as to why she was there. After some time, she realized the Earth was a bit cold and dark. Then she realized the Earth had beauty within it. It was just waiting to be woken up. And that was why she was sent there, to wake the Earth up. Hence why spring is so beautiful. Easter is the day that people celebrate the waking up of Earth from its wintry sleep. Now, why the heck are there eggs involved? Well, the eggs represent rebirth and fertility, but there is a different story for that one. There is some speculation on this one, but it is said that Osatra changed a bird into a hare, a bunny rabbit, on the day of Easter. And to celebrate the festivities, the bunny started laying colorful eggs all over the place. Kind of like decorations. Hope you learned a bit.
Wow, I learned quite a bit. What did you learn in that video?
I learned absolutely nothing from Pagan Jeff Durbin. Yes.
Yeah.
So the problem with Pagan Jeff Durbin there is that all of that stuff again comes from folklore traditions in the late 1800s. I mean, it comes from this idea about Ostra turning birthing this rabbit or doing these sort of tricks, these magic tricks. They come from a journal called American Notes and Inquiries, where they were just sort of answering stories, trying to answer questions. They didn't cite any sources when they put this stuff out, but people, like even today, believe them as if they were telling the truth. The actual origin of the Easter bunny is very innocent in origin. It actually in Europe, especially in Germanic regions, after winter would end, you'd start to see a lot more animals in the spring. Animals are coming out for mating season. So we have references to Easter foxes, Easter ravens, even Easter butterflies, because this is when they started seeing these animals. In Germany, hares, for example, come out and you could see them boxing and fighting over mates in the fields. So Easter hares started to be associated with the season. And so we don't even start seeing references to Easter hares until the late 1500s. And again, it was just associated with the Easter celebration by proximity and time. Now, when you bring that to America, bunnies are cuter. We have more bunnies here than hares. So it just became Easter bunny. So the Easter bunny is really an American tradition that was sort of modified from a German custom in the 1500s. Yeah. And again, it just has to do with animals showing up in the springtime and then being associated with that. It's like the fact that, what do you see a lot in November? Well, turkeys. So turkey became associated with Thanksgiving and it became the annual Thanksgiving meal. But I mean, there's no evidence that turkey was actually eaten at the first Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims and the American Indians. So, I mean, that's kind of how things worked.
Sorry for interrupting your currently scheduled programming, but did you know you can go to apologiastudios.com and become an all-access member? With all-access membership, you get exclusive content from all of Apologia Studios productions. Not to mention, Cultish is an Apologia Studios production, so you'll get access to Cultish, The Aftermath, where Jerry and I talk together after our most recent series, discussing what we thought. It's really cool. We have a lot of fun doing it, and, we can't do this without the studio. It keeps the lights on. And we can't also do this without you. So please go to apologiastudios.com and become an all-access member. Now back to the programming.
Right, exactly. And I think one thing I found interesting, Andrew, just give me your thoughts before we jump on to the next video, is that when he made one of his knowledge claims, the primary source he pointed to, and I don't know if you can see it from our end, was he's pointing to a title of a YouTube video. I'm not a historian, but typically I don't, like, if you're making a claim, like I'm reading the biography of Ulysses S. Grant, I don't recall that person pointing to titles to YouTube videos about what his conversations were like with his generals and the decision making that he had back and forth.
Right.
That's not how you do it.
No, and I always tell people, don't cite my videos, cite the sources I use in my videos.
Right.
I mean, because like this is what you got to do. Go to the primary sources. Just like point out the fact the only reference we have in history to Ostra is Saint Bede, and he mentions nothing about bunnies. He mentions no specific dates. He just says in April they had some feasts to honor her. We don't know when. We don't know what they did. Had nothing to do with eggs or bunnies, though.
Yeah, Andrew,
Yeah.
What thoughts do you have before we jump on the next video?
So some of these people, I'm assuming here, but I would assume that they're the same type of people who make claims that the Bible was transmitted or translated, let's say, like telephonically, like the game of telephone. But we know through history that that's not true. We have a manuscript tradition. We can check all of these manuscripts. It's like 13,000 or so in terms of our own American translation to the Greek, and so what. But it seems like what they're actually doing with history is they're playing a telephone game of history without actually really trying to look at the sources, doing the very same things that they would claim that we do with the transmission of the biblical text. So I don't know. It's just kind of ironic to me.
Oh, absolutely. You have one TikTok star will cite a YouTube video, which cited a blog, which cited the History Channel, and that's where they're getting their stuff from.
All right, so next we have a TikToker, Electric Karma, I think it is the TikToker, and the title is The Real Origins of Easter. So let's go ahead and see if she can take us to task. Let me go ahead and hit the play button and see what happens here.
Happy another holiday that Christians stole from pagans. Let's talk about the actual origins of Easter. Easter actually began as a traditional pagan festival that celebrated the spring in the northern hemisphere. But the Christians stole that and claimed it as theirs.
Yeah.
There you go. 14 seconds. Mic drop.
The ironic thing is they just assume Christians are so bland and dumb they just can't come up with their own traditions. They got to steal everything. That's just not how it works. I mean, most of the customs we have for our holidays today come from European folk traditions, American folk traditions, or Christian customs. Well, why can't Christians come up with their own holidays? Why do they got to steal everything? What's your evidence? And again, no evidence that Easter was a spring festival in the northern hemisphere until Christians moved in and started celebrating Easter to honor the resurrection.
Yeah.
Then it became an actual spring festival.
I know. And this is interesting. Here we have another one. This one is talking about how Easter is really colonialization, because that's what we like to. That's what Christianity is all about. Just going around, pillaging and plundering, taking everything for our own. We're just like the Vikings. We're just going up. I'm just thinking we're a bunch of just Ragnar Lothbrok, just going up and burning everything down, taking everything. So here we go. Colonizers stole Easter. Let's see what happens here.
With Easter being celebrated tomorrow, I figured it was about time that I do my annual Easter is Not Christian talk. During Christmas time, I did my Christmas is Not Christian talk, and so of course, this kind of has to follow. So supposedly Easter is supposed to be the day that Jesus was resurrected, and this is what we celebrate as yesterday was Good Friday, that kind of thing, right? However, would you like to know why it doesn't stay the same day every single year that we celebrate Easter? Would it make sense that we would celebrate the day that Jesus was resurrected on the day Jesus was resurrected, and that date wouldn't necessarily change because he was resurrected on a single day, right? When actually Easter is celebrated on the Sunday of the first full moon after the spring equinox. So the spring equinox was on March 20th, and so after the first full moon, which is today, tomorrow is Sunday, that would make it Easter. Shockingly enough, this comes from a pagan tradition, which relatively translates to Easter month. So things like the Easter bunny and Easter eggs, those all come from pagan practices. For example, like rabbits are supposed to symbolize like a new fertility, like the whole spring situation. So it kind of represents the goddess that is kind of in charge of that. Eggs, of course, explanatory. Of course, this isn't based on opinion or anything. There was a whole thing with the colonization that, the Christians came to colonize pagan holidays, so it was easier for them to transition when they were trying to take over and make Christianity the worldwide religion. Similarly, Christmas, of course, is celebrated on Saturnalia, which, Jesus wasn't even born on Christmas Day. He was born in, the spring or the summer. So they've chosen to celebrate his birthday on coincidentally the same day as a pagan holiday. So you see how things kind of match up there. The same thing with Easter. Because to me, it doesn't exactly make sense that if someone was resurrected on a certain day, we wouldn't celebrate it on that day. Why would the day change every single year? It's a practice for pagans because it's a moon thing, it's an equinox thing, it's a whole like fertility ritual, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the more you know, my annual PSA. Blessed be and spread the good news.
There we go. All right, so that's her PSA. What should be our? Yeah, what should be our? What's our PSA in response to that?
Well, she needs to do some more history because the Jews had a calendar that had holidays that changed every year. You'd think if they wanted to celebrate the actual Passover, why does the Passover change every year? Why don't they just celebrate on the day they actually left Egypt? Well, because again, they had a lunar solar calendar, and that's the way these things moved. Easter, Jesus was crucified and died during Passover week, so they started following originally the Jewish calendar, and then the Christians sort of modified it after that, but they kept following the same kind of lunar indicators to celebrate the holiday. So, just because someone follows a lunar calendar doesn't mean it's pagan. That is a non sequitur at best. And so this whole day that they were colonizing, that's just utter nonsense as well. We have no evidence of Christians actually wanting to colonize holidays. Again, all the holidays we have today, the major holidays, were not colonized. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, Easter, 4th of July, Memorial Day, Valentine's Day, none of these were colonized. This is all just made up nonsense. And in fact, scholars like Robert Woodbury have pointed out that Christian missionary activity actually correlates with anti-colonial activity. Colonial reforms was brought about by missionaries in certain regions fighting against European colonialization. So Woodbury has pointed out that actually when you have more Christian ideas, more Christian evangelism and missionary activity, you get actually a move away from colonialism, a more closer to democracy, towards education, these kinds of things. So again, this idea that Christianity is going to lead to colonialism is just utter nonsense. And, there's no reason to think any of that stuff goes back to paganism.
No, definitely. Andrew, what are your thoughts as far as that video goes? What questions do you have for Michael right now?
Yeah, it seems like she had a great question for Christians, but didn't go to the right people to ask these questions. Instead, went to the internet to ask certain questions and came up with conclusions that were just not correct. That's kind of just what I'm thinking there. I don't know. It's just, it's sad when you listen to those things because it can sound rather convincing when you're using phrases like lunar or equinox. Like now people are thinking about those things like through a new age lens, which is the society in which we live. So, I think you did an excellent job, Mike, just breaking it down about the lunar calendar that the Jews had in terms of the Passover and calculating it and how it changes every single year because that's just the way their calendar worked. So yeah, I don't have any more questions in that one. You can go to another video.
It's all about, we don't need to celebrate on the exact day. It's about remembering the importance of the activities. We don't know the day Jesus was born, but December 25th is church tradition, so we just keep it. Doesn't hurt anyone.
Right. Yeah. Well, also this, how would you, for our audience, well, some people aren't even familiar with this word, but etymology. What's the proper definition of that word?
So etymology is the study of words and where they come from and how they're used and anything surrounding that, I believe.
And what would you say, and what's a proper way to view etymology?
Depends on what subject we're talking about, how we're using it.
Usually when it comes like to history, because we're talking specifically like history, primary sources, and so a lot of times people will try and look at the origins of words, but a lot of times people they'll view the ancient world through this lens of like how something is pronounced in English, but this is the ancient world before English was ever invented.
Oh yeah, they'll assume that the words in English somehow carry some sort of hidden pagan meaning, like assuming Easter goes back to the goddess Ishtar. Well, they sound similar enough, but that's ridiculous. That's like assuming that anytime I talk about a goose, I'm talking about the Spanish word gusto. They're not the same thing. Sometimes people just make the same noises from their mouth for different words. Like, I could say, I'm going to give you a gift. Would you be happy to hear that? No, you wouldn't, because I just said I'm going to give you poison, because in German, the word gift means poison.
Right.
Does that mean that every time I say the word gift, I'm actually saying I'm giving you poison? Well, no, that's what these anti-holiday people are basically saying when they make these type of arguments.
Right. Or even sometimes what they'll try and do is like, if you want to adapt the idea, and we'll unpack this in a second because we're going to talk about Ishtar, because that's the argument that people make that Easter is pagan because the words sound somewhat the same. But when you adopt this type of etymology where you're trying to base hidden, in my opinion, hidden esoteric meaning on the pronunciation of words, you can prove anything that you want to, because you can make anything sound like anything you want to. Like I can argue that Sanskrit is a form of mind control, because if I want to give my own esoteric etymology, I could say, oh, sane script, sane, insane script. It's some like, and so there's people on the internet who literally will do that. And so that's where it's like, I don't think like you can't have with truth, when truth begins with you, like you can make anything mean anything. And that's not how we understand anything about history. So that being said, let's jump into, this is a nice TikTok video talking about the dark history of Easter that no one wants you to know about. No one's known up until now, until we have found the dark intricacies of this TikTok video, which will be anywhere from 15 to 60 seconds. So shout out to Brandy. Thank you for putting this video compilation together. And here we go.
Can we talk about the dark history of Easter? You gotta make sure you check outside. Sorry to say that Easter has nothing to do with Jesus. Many aspects of traditional Christianity, holidays, practices, doctrines, the bunnies, the eggs, springtime, came not from Christ or the Bible, but came from pagan religion. Easter Sunday is a Babylonian pagan holiday, which idolizes the fertility goddess Ishtar. Worshipping Ishtar was intended to ask for her blessing of fertility on the crops and everything else. On the first Sunday after the full moon, they would celebrate by baking cakes, getting drunk, and committing other heinous crimes. Women were required to celebrate the conception by laying down at the temple of Ishtar and having relations with anybody who walks in. There is a very, very dark history on why they color eggs. Babies were sacrificed, and the blood of the infants were dipped in the eggs for Ishtar. Want to know the reason there's a bunny rabbit? Rabbits can bear several litters of young each year, meaning they have high fertility. Decorating eggs seems harmless until you consider the origins of it. None of this had to do with Christianity. The bunnies and the eggs are not as simple as they seem, and this holiday is not holy. Y'all be safe.
Y'all be safe.
Yes.
From painting eggs.
I know. Well, she does bring up a couple of points. Let's talk about that, because she does talk about, Ishtar. It sounds somewhat similar, but what's the true origin? Was there an actual celebration called Ishtar? Is it actually connected to Easter? I mean, how do we actually address that holistically?
Yeah, we have no evidence of this.
Right.
Again, it's just made up. Again, it's funny because I did a response to her on TikTok one time where she was arguing that our skin is really green, and I had to debunk that of all things. Oh yeah, it got like 1 million views. But it was a really, really crazy video. But yeah, she's getting a lot of this stuff from Alexander Hislop, actually. This is the kind of claims you see in his book, The Two Babylons, that the whole decorating of the eggs is about sacrificing babies, and it all goes back to Ishtar. He made up all that stuff, and yet it still gets passed around as if it's true. None of it's true. Again, the decorating of Easter eggs came from Lent. From Lent. It's Catholic, basically. It did not go back to some sort of ancient Babylonian custom. Right. There's no connection of Easter to Ishtar. If it was, you got to explain why the Christians took the celebration of Ishtar, started calling it the Pascha, and then only centuries later in Germanic and English regions, they started calling it by its original name, which weird, train of evidence there. I mean, but yeah, again, utter nonsense. Nothing about this idea of being a pagan fertility ritual. Ishtar's symbols were like the lion and the star. We have no depictions of Ishtar with bunny rabbits, hares, eggs, any of that kind of stuff. Sure, in some cultures around the world, eggs were probably used in some sort of fertility ritual because they're eggs, but nothing associated with Ishtar. And again, just because a pagan used something for evil in the past, that doesn't mean it's wrong for Christians to use. I mean, again, pagans used to sacrifice animals to their deities. They used to build temples. Okay, well, God commanded the Jews to sacrifice animals and build a temple. That doesn't mean those things are evil just because a pagan did something similar somewhere on earth. Yeah.
No, it definitely makes sense. Let me ask this, because we kind of just addressed some of these things, is that some people would even ask, too, because I grew up where it was just celebrating the resurrection of Jesus is risen, Christ is risen, he's risen indeed. And I was like, oh, well, my other friends were doing hunting for Easter eggs on that day. So I just said, oh, this is my friends who don't go to church. That's what they do. So even there's a lot of Christians, I think, who still struggle with the fact, well, what do I do? Is that a distraction? Is this like, I want our kids to focus in on Jesus rising from the dead, and somehow the hunting for eggs, it will be detrimental to that. Not even adopting that the Easter is pagan argument. And honestly, I think some of them are just asking honest questions whether they do that or not. Have you ever thought through that, or what's your response to people who just bring that into question?
Yeah, well, I think we do need to realize the focus needs to be on Jesus and his resurrection. That needs to be the main focus. But that doesn't mean we get rid of everything else. So, I mean, go to the Gospel of John at the wedding of Cana. Jesus turned water into wine so people could have a good time. He didn't say, no more wine because I have to give a sermon because it's all about me. Jesus is not a God who hates fun, who hates kids having games that they play annually as part of the celebration. I mean, sure, I think Jesus wants us to remember his resurrection, and that needs to be the central focus. But there's nothing wrong with having an Easter egg hunt as well, especially if it's for kids and it's for enjoyment. Let's keep things in focus here. It's not going to as long as it doesn't become the main focus of Easter, there's nothing wrong with it.
Awesome. Andrew, what's on your mind? What do you think about this, or what questions do you have?
Yeah, it's kind of like what Mike was talking about earlier. Like, we can't legislate convictions of conscience. If someone has a conviction that they don't want to use eggs, during Easter, then so be it. But you can't go tell your brother, this is sinful for you to have your children go and grab and find hidden eggs. It's just not. It's not right. Especially if the reason why you think or you have a conviction is based off of pseudo history. Like, we got to be very careful when we're trying to legislate our convictions to others. Technically we shouldn't do it unless the Bible literally calls something sin, and then it's no longer really a conviction. It's more of it's a black and white, like that's just the reality of it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, we see this a lot with Torah observant Christians. They have felt convicted not to celebrate Easter or Christmas, and then fine, whatever, Romans 14. But then they come out and they go, and you shouldn't either, so you can be super special, holy like me, because that's what Jesus really wants. And it's terrifying what they're trying to do.
Well, not only that, I mean, that's actually the majority of the pushback, just from us asking the question, was not just you shouldn't celebrate it, but the only thing you should celebrate are the feast. Like, this is not, I don't know, if someone wants to look back and maybe reenact one of these and maybe have an appreciation of like where we came from, I guess that's okay, as maybe that's your thing. But to have an idea that this is now the way you're supposed to do it, and now you have a bunch of have and have nots who does and who doesn't, I think that's problematic. Like, what do you think? Like, what would you say? Because I mean, their primary argument is that the only holidays are permitted are the feast, therefore every other holiday is a man-made holiday, and they make exceptions whether it's Christmas. You honestly see similar argumentation with Jehovah's Witnesses and why they don't celebrate even 4th of July, and they don't celebrate Christmas either. Like, as Christians, what gives us a license to create holidays? Because some people say we can't do anything aside from the feast. Like, how do you, what have you thought through with the type of pushback that you've gotten from your videos?
I mean, I don't understand where they're coming from. I mean, what is their view of Christian ethics, that we can only do things the Bible allows? I mean, this is terrifying. Paul says, for the law is summed up, you shall love thy neighbor as thyself. Okay? It lays down principles for us to follow. Obviously, doing something like torture would go against that. Don't do that. Playing video games. Well, for most people, they're going to be fine as long as they don't become addictive, or they're pushing really gory, horrible things. They're fine. So, like, what is wrong about having a custom that you hide Easter eggs once a year for a kid? How is that sinful? And we have a precedence in the Bible for creating holidays to honor things. The book of Esther celebrates the holiday of Purim. Okay, God never commanded the Jews to keep that holiday. They came up with it on their own to commemorate a great event. Why can't we follow that same principle, the same guidance there? Hanukkah as well. We know that from the New Testament, Jesus kept the Feast of Lights, Hanukkah. Okay, again, another man-made holiday. Does that mean it's evil? No. So where does God say, I never want you to celebrate holidays other than the ones I've given you? Nowhere. Okay, where does God say it'd be sinful to decorate a pine tree once a year as part of honoring the incarnation? Never. Okay, again, what kind of God are they worshiping? Are they worshiping Christ, the Spirit, who is a victorious God who has freed us from Satan and freed us from all of these constraints that were holding us back? Or do they worship this insecure, legalistic deity that's like, oh, well, you can't, only can do certain things, and don't decorate trees, and don't hide eggs because that offends me. Why? Don't ask questions. It just does for some weird reason.
Right. No, we're definitely going to, so what we're doing here is we're just kind of giving a general overview of that. And just tell everyone real quickly, tell me where they can find more about your stuff, because you have a bunch of videos that addresses this.
Yeah, I got a bunch of videos on these holidays, Easter, Valentine's Day, Christmas, Halloween, Mother's Day. I even have a video on Thanksgiving and why it's not a racist holiday, all on my YouTube channel, Inspiring Philosophy. I have shorts I do on TikTok and Instagram as well, so same name on those channels as well. Though. Yeah, a lot of those are responses, so I make them kind of comical.
Yeah, and I think that even now, because of just the implosion of just the TikTok, I mean, Witch Talk, we did this series last year, March Montenegro confronting Witch Talk. I mean, it's just a plethora. Andrew, you just did a response video to somebody talking about, what was the video? It was, Andrew, what was the video we did?
It was Drag is Holy. Drag is Holy. Yeah.
Yeah. So this guy used the text, when Jesus says, I wanted to gather you as a hen under my wings, and somehow use that to like justify like drag. It was out there.
I would suspect he'd use that to justify being a furry more than drag. I mean,
yeah. So it just goes to show, like, it's just a plethora of nonsense. So I think it's very refreshing to see stuff like yours, stuff like Red Pen Logic. We're starting to do our own response videos, and there needs to be like good pushback to so much of this nonsense that's being pushed. So that's something I really appreciate your channel. All right, so that being said, we're going to go and wrap up part 1 of this conversation. We kind of got a general overview of this. We're going to do a second part where it's going to be kind of like a greatest hits compilation. This is like a Time Life greatest hits, debunking pseudo history, everything from Joe Rogan saying the Bible was put together by Constantine. We're going to maybe talk a little more about Halloween, whether it's connected to Samhain. We'll have a little fun with that. Talk about the Christmas. We're just going to find the greatest hits compilation and see what we can come up with. So that being said, I appreciate all for listening in, and we'll talk to you all next time on Cultish, where we enter into the kingdom of the cults and the fringe and the pseudo history. Talk to you all soon.